I'm Brother Russell T. Osguthorpe, Sunday School General President, and today we have with us Elder Jeffrey R. Holland of the Quorum of the 12. Today we'll be talking about the importance of teaching and how we can learn how to teach more effectively. So, Elder Holland, you've talked a lot about teaching. You've taught us all so many things about good teaching and good learning. But first, why don't we talk about why is it so important in the first place? Why is it so important, gospel learning and teaching in the church?
Well, as you know, maybe better than any, Brother Osguthorpe, I'm going to call you Russell.
Yeah, that's good.
We don't have available to us most of the means that the rest of the world uses to motivate. We don't hire people, we don't fire them, we don't berate them, we don't threaten them, we don't sue them. You know, the things that generally make the rest of the world work in business or in government or, you know, a whole sphere of a kind of quasi-professional relationships. We don't, in the gospel and in the church, we don't use that. We don't have that. We really have words. We have words filled with love and driven by the Spirit, but we basically have words.
You remember Arthur Henry King, I think.
Yeah.
One day he said, "Our words are our deeds."
Yeah, exactly.
This is all we can give. Yeah.
And in the beginning was the Word. I don't think that's
right.
I don't think that's incidental. No. There's a great line from the lectures on faith, the 7th lecture on faith, where those early brethren teach that when a man works by faith, he works by words. And you think about it, the examples were that when God wanted light, he said, "Let there be light." He didn't go work with Con Edison or something, you know, he just said, "Let there be light." And if you need the tree plucked up and planted in the deep, you just command it to be plucked up and planted. So words are our principal vehicle for communicating the gospel, and that's what we tell the missionaries, that's what we tell teachers, that's what we tell parents. The right kind of words, loving words, as I say, and certainly spiritual words. But that one way or the other just sounds to me like teaching. It could be called preaching, maybe from the pulpit, but it's all the same to me. It's and that's what has built your faith and mine, and it's what will build the next generation. It's the way we share our hopes and our dreams with our friends. We talk to them, and carefully done and skillfully done and prayerfully done, that's good teaching.
You know, this thing of just talking with one another, and we call that teaching. I've thought oftentimes how great classes that I've been in are classes where it seems like a conversation.
Yeah.
Where it's not one person
Sure.
doing all the talking, but where we have back and forth and it's a natural give and take. When that happens, I feel good about
Sure.
what's going on because one person's listening to another, one person's talking, then listening. It's not a one-way communication.
Yeah. And I think it shouldn't, anything really, really good, any performance in quotation marks, I think when it's really good, it shouldn't draw attention to itself. In a great concert, in a great musical performance, you get caught up in it. It's not like you say, "Well, there's the oboe," you know, and that's a little detached. If you're really into it, you're part of it. And I think that's what happens in a good class. That's what happens in the kind of conversation you're talking about. I think you don't correct me even if I'm wrong. I think Plato said, "Whom can I teach but my friends?"
Yes.
And that suggests a kind of intimacy, a warmth, no pretense. That's kind of like, I think, what you just said.
It was interesting when I was up at BYU, Idaho the other day, and just before giving that talk, people would come up sometimes, and they've done this to you. They'd say, "Do you get nervous? You know, you're going to give a talk to several thousand people, do you get nervous?" I said to these young people, I said, "You're all my friends."
Yeah.
We're not nervous when
Sure,
we're around
sure.
friends. We are nervous sometimes when we're around people we don't know.
Uh-huh.
But when we're around friends, we're comfortable.
Yeah.
We feel good. And that's when good teaching
Yeah,
happens, when
yeah.
people all feel, I think, this
Sure.
friendship in the class.
Yeah, I think any good teacher, any natural teacher, will create the kind of climate in the room where it seems a circle of friends and peers and people of goodwill. Nobody's threatened. The teacher isn't. The student isn't. He or she will have taught in such a way that they know that teacher isn't going to embarrass anybody, isn't going to make them feel stupid.
Right.
So people's confidence level goes up, and you're the great conscience for the church on the fact that great teaching is only half of it. What we want is great learning.
Right.
And so a teacher who would embarrass or a teacher who would demean a student may think he or she's doing great teaching, but there's no learning going on. That learning just ceased. So we'd be destined for failure on that score without this loving, warm atmosphere.
I remember a class one time. It was a missionary preparation class, and they were memorizing scriptures, and I said, why don't you get together and practice your scripture, and then who would come up and say a scripture for us? Nobody volunteered, not one person. I said, hey, you're all going to be missionaries. I said,
Yeah.
Missionaries volunteer for everything. And I gave him a nice speech, and I said, now how many will volunteer? And nobody. And I said, okay. I said, what's going on here? I don't understand what's going on here. And this one in the back of the room, he raised his hand and he said, well, we're kind of uncomfortable. And I said, oh, you're afraid. He said, well, I just say uncomfortable. I said, you're afraid somebody might see some fault in you and maybe mock you or something.
Sure.
And he said, well, kind of, yeah, that's it. And I said, no one is going to do that in this class. We are going to help you. If you have problems, we're going to help you. We're not here to criticize you. And I said, now how many will volunteer? And almost every hand went up. And I said, okay, this is it. Now we're pulling for each other. We're not trying to make someone else look bad.
Good lesson. I don't know what your lesson was that day, but you just taught them a great lesson, quite apart from whatever your proposed lesson was that day. That was good teaching.
Yeah. So this importance, sometimes I've thought if people could see how important gospel learning was in the whole scheme of things, it's like when we come to earth, it's all about learning and how we're going to learn to keep the commandments,
Sure.
learn to love one another. It's all about learning. We got to give up something old and take on a new way of thinking or being. And so I think, how can we help everyone in the church understand that, kind of elevate the importance of learning, gospel learning? How can we do that? Do you have any ideas about how?
Well, if I had any ideas, I'd be better at it than I am. But I agree with you. I do believe that's our course in life. We are people who believe in progress and growth and development, and that's learning with a capital L, I think. Mm-hmm. Some things you learn kind of the hard way, and other things you hope you learn the good way. But in any case, it's learning. I think we underestimate. I don't know. I want to say passion. Now I know everybody's got their own style.
Right.
Everybody's no two people are going to teach the same way. I'm told that Jonathan Edwards, who gave that great New England sermon on sinners in the hands of an angry God, he was roasting people. He was roasting people over the fires of hell in this sermon in Puritan New England. And they said he just gave it in an absolute monotone. Just stood up and just, I don't know. I don't quite know. Maybe he felt like if he put his heart into it, they'd all leave. I don't know. But so I know people have their own styles. Right. But a little enthusiasm, a little passion, a little joy in something that you're like. It is fun. I like watching Russell Osguthorpe. I love watching a great teacher because I can see that you're into it. I mean, you're having fun. You want people to feel what you're feeling. You want people to have the thought you're having. That's contagious. And so regardless of what the subject matter would be, regardless of what the content might be, I think to create a climate for learning is to show that the teacher is genuinely enthused, tickled about this. I like what I'm doing and I want you to feel what I'm feeling. That rubs off. And we've all been in classes that were kind of yawners. And and again, that isn't to comment on anybody's style, because some fairly straightforward teachers have really, really ignited me. So it isn't that anybody has to do it exactly the same way, but I think students can tell when you're interested. I think students can tell when it really is something you care about and a good idea. That, I don't know, communicates. I like a little passion.
You've been the one to teach us this, really, though. I remember when I was with you on a state conference one time, and you were speaking in an adult session, and you started out actually very quietly in this particular talk, and I thought, this is a little different for Elder Holland. I mean, it was kind of quiet, and you kind of slowly built up. And I told Lolly afterwards, I said, I had the strongest urge to stand up with cymbals
and clang them.
At one point, and clang them and say, this is the message here. Get this message. And she said, yeah, I felt the same way, because you helped us get into it, and then gradually deepened it, so that by the time you were really giving your central message, we were with you. I mean, we were just with you all the way. This is, and it's like not everybody can do it like Elder Holland can do it, but we can all do it in our own way, I think.
And it's a little hard to, that's a good qualification on the passion thing, because it's a little hard to jump in like you're a cheerleader or, you know, just shot out of a cannon on the 4th of July. I think you probably have to build a little chemistry and spirit with the audience. But if that building can point you toward that chance to bear a strong testimony or really have some conviction come through, then that's probably the natural flow of things.
I've always been interested in, I had a friend who said, either the teacher and the learner are both having a great time, or neither one is having a great time.
Good point.
So if the teacher looks out and the learners are nodding off, then, this is a cue. Something needs to change.
Then the speaker goes downhill.
Then the speaker goes down, and
vice versa.
And vice versa. They kind of get energy from each other.
No question. That's sometimes we're called to do a broadcast, and we'll just be speaking into a camera without an audience. Boy, there's a tangible material difference.
It's harder.
You're not feeling something from the audience, and I don't know how you'd define that. I don't know how you'd categorize that, but it's very real.
It's very real.
So, and that happens in a class. It happens, and I think at some point, Russ, we make sure that people out there in the listening audience realize that we're not just talking about a gospel doctrine class here. Teaching is not just somebody at the chalkboard and then these very dutiful students in their seats. We need to do a better job teaching from the pulpit and in meetings. I've been in some administrative meetings that I wish I weren't in, that are just deathly, just lethal. But people don't realize that's a teaching setting. We're supposed to be teaching there, and
leadership.
I'm supposed to walk out of there with motivation. And if somebody hasn't put a little something into it, again, it's a yawner.
And you've sat through your share of administrative meetings.
I've caused a few of them. I've led them.
I was in a meeting the other day with Elder Rasband, and at the very end of the meeting, he said, we've got to get heart in this. We've got to have oomph in this. And I looked over at him and I said, Elder Rasband, I said, you're getting me going. I said, you should have been a football coach,
Yeah, it's the oomph. That's what we need.
He said, I always wanted to be a footballer.
Let me, if you can indulge me, can you indulge me?
Absolutely.
I have only one quote today, but this is it.
Yeah.
It's from President Hinckley. Let me read this. Can we stand this on the air?
Absolutely.
This is from President Gordon B. Hinckley. Effective teaching is the essence of leadership in the church.
Right.
Effective teaching is the very essence of leadership in the church. Eternal life, he continues, will come only as men and women are taught with such effectiveness that they change their lives. They cannot be coerced. They must be led. And that means good teaching. That's a great quote. And that's leadership. He's not talking about a gospel doctrine class there, though we want good gospel doctrine classes. I think he's talking about high council meetings and primary presidency meetings, and
even parents with children.
Parents with children, especially. Yeah. Especially.
Yeah. This whole thing about not coerced. Sometimes there are ways of teaching that you feel like you're, as a learner, you're under coercion.
Yeah. And you probably rebel against that and resist it the way we do about almost any coercion. That's why I said at the outset, basically, we really only have words, and those have to be loving, kind, spiritual words. We can't. It's both doctrinally wrong for me to force you, but also practically. How would I do it? I mean, where is the block and tackle big enough that I could drag you into the gospel? I don't know how you. I don't know how you do that.
You violate agency. Yeah. I always say, in the end, the learner holds all the cards.
Yeah, sure.
The teachers can do what they do, but the learner has to decide whether or not that learner is going to learn.
That's right. And they can resist in 100 ways till the cows come home.
That's right.
You have to. It's effective teaching. It's getting through to them.
I so much want every member of the church to understand just how key this is to life. Not even just gospel living, but just to life. I mean, we are teaching each other and learning from each other. I mean, I'm learning from you. Well, all the time we're together, we are learning and we are teaching when we're in regular conversation. I think the reason people like to get together is because they learn something from this other person. That person's different than they are. And so I so much want everyone in the church to understand just how fundamental this is to everything.
Well, and how much good we can do. If we would think of teaching more broadly than we do, I don't want to sound like little Johnny One Note, but the minute you say teaching, you think of a teacher up in front of a class with chalk and quiet students afraid to say anything. But you think of all the other ways that we teach, that kids teach each other, junior high kids teach each other, missionary companions teach each other, that has nothing to do with companionship study or a lesson to the investigator. You just think of husbands and wife teach each other, and they're not standing at a chalkboard with chalk, but we're teaching, we're sending signals, we're affirming or denying things, and we just need to be conscious of that. I ran across a great line years ago, really, but I used it again the other day. When W.W. Phelps had betrayed the prophet Joseph, it's one of the great tragedies of the church, pointed him out in the town square at Far West and said, "That's the man." And they were going to execute him. Joseph Smith was going to be executed. If it hadn't been for Alexander Donovan, he would have been. And 2 years later, or 4 years later, Phelps is asking for forgiveness and asking to come back into the church, weeping and pleading for Joseph and the others to bring him back into the church and let him come back. And there's a terrific line where he says, "I want to be saved if my friends will help me." Now, that could be said by every single one of us. All of us. We want to be saved if our friends will help us. Well, that's a kind of teaching. You think of how influential, how important peers are in our high school years. The right teaching, the right example, the right word at the right time by a good kid can change somebody else's life forever. The wrong word, the wrong example, the destructive, the negative teaching can, I suppose, people have been lost for less than that to the gospel. So we're teaching all the time, and we need to take it seriously. We need to believe that that's the way people get to heaven.
That's right. We get to heaven by helping each other get
exactly.
there.
I want to be saved if my friends will help me.
And when we're helping them, we're teaching them. I mean, it's.
I think it's a very serious matter, and we probably don't think of it enough. We just hardly anybody would think he or she was a teacher until they got a call from you in the Sunday school to go teach the 17-year-olds.
I really like how you've broadened it, how you've helped us remember that teaching is happening all the time, not just in a formal classroom.
I feel strongly about that.
And people when they think of teaching, they think of it in the classroom.
Yeah.
But it's much broader than this.
Yeah. That's in some ways almost the most artificial of all of our teaching.
Yeah.
It's the least dynamic and it's the least everyday applied, and we're doing a lot of teaching besides that.
But it could be.
Oh, it could be, and it should be.
But right now, in a sense,
it should be better.
Yeah, we're so concerned in that formal class of saying everything. You've talked a lot about the problem of content
all
delivery.
The material you got to get through.
Get all the material. You got to unload this stuff.
Here are these manuals.
I told someone the other day, I said, it's a little bit like someone's bringing a wheelbarrow into the class and say, I've got this wheelbarrow full of stuff.
That's right. Yeah.
Dump it on.
And don't get in the way, and don't ask any questions. Don't have a thought. I got to get through this.
I got to get through this. And look at the clock. We're almost out of time. We got to get through this. And I saw one time that brought in so many books that the person could hardly carry them. Just, I've gone through all these, and now you're going to get them, you know. Yeah. And you say, well, no, this is just the wrong. Sometimes I think, can we talk for a minute about just the role of a teacher? Because if I see my role as to deliver all this content, then that's, I have an obligation to deliver every little thing that's in that manual. If I have that idea in my head, that's my role, then I'm going to do it. And so part of the challenge, I think, is helping people see a different role.
Sure.
How do you see this different role?
Well, let me just start by thanking you on that particular subject. I suppose, I'm guessing, maybe short of fear, you've talked about fear, maybe short of the fear a teacher has to stand up there and think he or she's going to make a fool of himself or herself. That may be the number one challenge, but certainly neck and neck and a close second is the idea of how am I going to get through this, this stuff. Right. And you know what I know, and I think everyone out in that audience would agree. One great principle taught would be worth a dozen poorly taught or superficially taught.
Say that again.
Well, I'm too old now. We get smart too old. We get smart too late. But if I were teaching again, and I think I tried to do this, but maybe not well enough, I was famous for ending up farther back in the scriptures at the end of the semester than when I started. Somehow I could work backwards, but I believe if I could do it all over again, I would just go into a manual or into an outline or the scriptures, whatever it is people are asking me to do, whatever the subject is, whatever the curriculum is. I'd go in and I'd find an item or two that I could really put my heart and soul into, that I could really be passionate about. And I would teach those at the exclusion. I mean, if it had to be, if I only have so much time, only got so many hours in a class, only got so many weeks in a year, I'd teach what I could teach and hope that mattered and stayed, and they'd figure out a way to get the other stuff. But to superficially just do a laundry list, just a checklist of an outline too great and too large and too long for an hour's or a week's or a month's instruction, that just seems to me to be exactly the wrong thing to do. That's poor teaching.
I think it is, and I think it's one of the best things that has happened with youth curriculum, as we've said, for this whole month. you've got one doctrine, and it's a doctrine.
Yeah.
We can state this doctrine, the Godhead, the atonement.
And we're going to come back next week and talk about it some more.
We're going to come back. If we don't get through it very well, we're going to come back. We don't have to get through it in 1 week. We can come back another week and another week.
Change the whole atmosphere, change the whole tone in the room.
I had a group of youth one time, and I said, how is it different right now in the new curriculum from the old? And this 16-year-old boy, he said, well, I'll be honest. He says, when I saw we were going to spend a whole month on the Godhead, he says, I thought that is too long. and he said, Brother Osguthorpe, he says, I was wrong. Yeah. He said, I learned so much that I didn't know about the Godhead. He said, it's not too long. Sure. He said, it was really good. He said, I was wrong. Yeah. And I thought, that person can actually tell me what he was talking, what they were talking about in class, which is unusual. Sure. I can go to a class and say, what was the doctrine taught?
Sure.
And people might say, well, we talked about this story and that story. I said, but what was the doctrine that came out of the story? Well, I don't know. There are lots of doctrines.
Well, we've all been accused of being a mile wide and an inch deep. Right. And just, I don't think anybody takes much away from that. You remember the story, Woody Allen took one of these speed reading courses, took some kind of one of these speed reading literature, and he read War and Peace. And on the quiz, they said, what's it about? And he said, I think it was about Russia. Well, that's about what people take away.
That's right.
It's about what people take away from a class where there's so much being thrown at you. And
see, we talked about Abraham. What about Abraham? I don't know.
We're not supposed to know anything about him. Well, that's that, and that suggests too, I think, the emphasis on learning. On the teaching side, the old traditional teaching mode, you might say, well, gosh, I'm not teaching much here. Right. I'm not doing what a teacher is supposed to do. But if we put the learning hat on, then say what's going on, and you realize a ton more is going on in that kind of learning than before. You've been my best conscience on making sure that as we talk about teaching, we always talk about learning. I think it's been easy for me because I love teaching. Sure. And once upon a time, I thought that's all I was going to do with my life. And I guess in a way it still is. But it's so easy for me to think about teach. And you've been wonderful to remind me that if somebody isn't learning, right. We haven't got much teaching going on. And that's I think that changes the whole view of what's happening in a like the youth curriculum. We've got young people learning, I think, better.
I truly believe it.